Good evening and welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. My name is Buffy. I'm an 18-year criminal defense attorney, and I will be offering legal analysis on this case, not talking about technicality or anything of that sort, but in-depth legal analysis where it is available. Today we're talking about Justice Served Cold, the long road to Joseph James D'Angelo. Most people think justice is loud. They imagine arrests with sirens, confessions, courtroom drama, and verdicts that feel emotionally satisfying. If that is your impression, it's not going to be as satisfying. But some of the most accurate justice is almost silent. Tonight, I want to tell you about a case where justice didn't arrive because someone finally broke. It arrived because the system learned how to wait. This is not just the story of a serial offender. It is the story of restraint, failure, time, and what accountability looks like when it finally arrives cold. This is the case of Joseph James D'Angelo. And before we talk about what he did, we need to talk about why this case matters now, decades later. Because if you only hear this as the Golden State Killer case, you'll miss the point entirely. This case is about how justice actually works and how often it doesn't. Who he was and why that mattered. Joseph James D'Angelo was not a shadowy drifter. He was not an outsider. He was not someone living on the margins. He was a police officer. That single fact matters more than anything else in this case, other than the victims, of course. D'Angelo understood patrol routines, investigative blind spots, how evidence was collected, how victims were questioned, how credibility worked. He knew what law enforcement expected criminals to look like, and he didn't look like that. And this is one of the first uncomfortable truths we have to sit with. The system often struggles to recognize harm when it comes from inside its own ranks. And the fact that he had the cheat code is essentially what I would call it. And so that's what probably helped him evade arrest for so long until the system decided to level up and picked a cheat code of their own. D'Angelo blended in. He had a family. He held jobs. He lived an outwardly ordinary life. And during that same period, he was committing some of the most prolonged and psychologically devastating crimes in modern American history. And the fact that he was inside the fold of law enforcement makes it even more terrifying. What made D'Angelo different wasn't just the violence, it was control. During what became known as the East Area Rapist phase, he targeted homes, often occupied by couples. He restrained victims, he moved through their spaces, he lingered. This wasn't impulsive violence, it was ritualized domination. He exploited people's sense of safety in their own homes. The assumption that danger comes from strangers, not routine. The limits of jurisdictional communication, because at that time, particular jurisdictions were separate and on their own and often did not communicate with each other. Over time, his crimes escalated from sexual violence to homicide. And here's where many people misunderstand this case. They assume escalation was obvious in real time. It wasn't. Because jurisdictions did not share information effectively. We didn't have internet at that time. Should they have been able to pick up the phone? Especially, in larger areas like California, which is where this happened. Because patterns weren't yet trusted as evidence. Because pre-DNA forensic science had limits we forget now because we're so used to learning and hearing about DNA. That wasn't like that back then. And because certainty arrived too early in the wrong directions. Why he wasn't caught. System failure, not mystery. This case went unsolved for decades, not because investigators didn't care, because they really wanted to solve this case, especially considering the fact that there was that forum that they had in California about this rapist and killer, and he had actually shown up for that and had actually terrorized someone that had appeared for that forum. So he was very, very big on taking risks and chances, probably because he felt like he could hide behind his badge. But because the system wasn't built to connect what needed connecting. different counties, different task forces, different evidence standards. And perhaps most importantly, no technology yet capable of proving what many suspected. People often ask, how could he get away with it for so long? When you're hiding in plain sight, who is going to have the courage to say, I bet it's a police officer, right? Because there is the thin blue line. And the thin blue line has existed for many, many years, and it still probably exists to this day. Look at O.J. Simpson's case. Look at the idea of the Rodney King case. Similar thing, thin blue line, right? They were acquitted. The better question is, how much do we expect the system to do with the tools it had at this time? Ultimately, it came down to good old police work, and sometimes it can be hard to just figure it out based on that. So DNA does give them advantage. Forensic evidence gives them an advantage. Profiling of who the perpetrator might be also gives them an advantage. This is where legal analysis matters. Probable cause is not proof. Suspicion is not conviction. And the burden of proof in criminal law is intentionally high because it's better one guilty man go free than an innocent person be falsely convicted. That standard exists to protect the innocent, but it also means that the guilty sometimes walk free longer than feels acceptable. This case forces us to sit with that discomfort. The long silence. For decades, Angelo lived freely. He married, he worked, he aged. And society did what it does in cold cases. It quietly assumed the perpetrator was dead, gone, or simply lucky. But time is not exoneration. Justice does not expire simply because we grow tired of waiting. And this is where the story turns in the favor of justice. When science caught up to truth, the breakthrough did not come from a confession. It did not come from media exposure. It did not come from pressure. It came from restraint and patience. Genetic genealogy solved this case. People wanting to know about their heritage offered their DNA, not D'Angelo. D'Angelo's DNA was ascertained through genetic genealogy based on one of his relatives providing their DNA, which led to him. His DNA was extracted or extrapolated to determine who it was. This was a method that didn't even exist when these crimes were committed. Allowed investigators to do something unprecedented, work backward from DNA to identity, which is huge. But for this finding, he never would have been caught, most likely. This wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. It took years. Years of patience, of perseverance, of hope and optimism that they would find out who was responsible for these crimes. And importantly, it was done carefully because rushing this kind of evidence would have jeopardized the entire case. Clean evidence protects convictions. The arrest, quiet by design. When D'Angelo was arrested, there was no chase, no spectacle, no public performance. Also, I should also mention that he had one conviction, I believe, and it was for shoplifting at a grocery store, which essentially was the thing that put him on the map because he had to have his DNA or his fingerprints, I think, or DNA tested based on that conviction, which is what landed him in the crosshairs of the police department. He was taken quietly. This wasn't weakness. That was strength. Because when evidence is solid, drama is unnecessary. The plea and why there was no trial. Many people expected a trial. Instead, prosecutors accepted a plea. This decision deserves attention because it reflects victim-centered justice, not avoidance. And it was not about trying to get glory or recognition or say, hey, we solved this, aren't we great? No, they wanted this terrible crime to finally reach its conclusion and to be done. And to give those that had lost loved ones peace and a break because they had been going through this for Lord knows how long, depending on their circumstances. People had lost their lives to this guy. And it needed to be closed cleanly and without a lot of drama. A trial would have re-traumatized survivors because they would likely have to testify. It would have dragged victims through decade-old horrors, risked evidentiary challenges. The plea ensured certainty and accountability. and also gave the victims a voice and gave them closure that they probably had been waiting for a very long time. Sometimes justice is not about the maximum punishment. It's about maximum truth without further harm. And I'm not 100% sure how old Mr. D'Angelo was, but likely this will be a life sentence for him. So he can no longer harm anyone else, which is much more important. Victim impact, where justice actually landed. At sentencing, victims finally spoke, not to persuade a jury, not to prove anything, but to be heard, because their experience was valuable, their feelings were valid, and they had been through a lot, and they didn't need a lot more to add and pile on to it, right? They didn't need confrontation. They didn't need any of that. They needed to be heard because they had a terrible experience that others wanted to help them with. But this is one of the most important lessons of this case. Justice is not complete until those harmed are acknowledged. Their pain is accepted. You might not understand it. You might want to know, why did they go along? Why did they this? Why did they that? And I want to say this very politely and very respectfully. Until you've gone through a traumatic crime or a traumatic experience, you can never fully understand. You may say, well, I would have fought him, or I would have tried to kill him, or I would have kicked him, or I would have ran. You know what? None of us know what we would do until we experience that situation. And until you experience that situation, it's extremely difficult to know what you would actually do. Where the case stands now, Joseph James D'Angelo was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. So clearly, end of him, an end of his freedom. He will never be free again. This case is closed legally. It will never be closed emotionally, and that distinction matters. These victims will live with what he has done to them for the rest of their lives. It will affect them probably every single day of their lives. As a person who has represented sexual assault and domestic violence victims, I can tell you with a lot of certainty that they never get over that. And it is something that lives with them and breathes with them and is with them every single day. And unfortunately, even though there is a verdict, I'm sure there are a lot of them that are still looking over their shoulders to this day. And for that, they deserve compassion, and my heart goes out to all of you. And I'm so happy that you finally got the resolution that you absolutely deserve. What this case teaches us. This case teaches us that justice doesn't need urgency to be accurate. Restraint is not indifference. Time does not erase responsibility. And accountability does not require spectacle. This is what justice looks like when it's allowed to mature instead of being forced. In the next episode, we'll look at a very different kind of delay. Not one caused by technology, but by privilege. Because sometimes justice isn't delayed by lack of tools. Sometimes it's delayed by insulation. And sometimes, even then, it still arrives. Justice can be best served cold sometimes. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and that you will come back and see us again soon. Thanks a lot. Have a great night. Bye-bye.